We're going to get started tonight. We've got Alan Beavers teaching us about worms.
Yeah.
So it should be good.
Yeah.
So let's open the floor. Does anyone have any goings on in the next month? I know Banks, you've got something you were telling me?
Yeah. Farm tour, sustainable farm tour, second Saturday of every month.
Second Saturday farm tour by Banks's.
Yep, it's at Sam's Lake Road, Claremont. It's free, complimentary, open to the public. Bring a bucket, bring a hat, and bring your curiosity. I teach sustainability. It's about an hour and a half long. We also give clippings of trees that you can take home with you and grow yourself. All complimentary. And there's 2 farmers that work there. We have an orchard, we have a food forest, we have one Monet garden, 2 shade gardens, a vegetable garden, an herb garden, a pineapple and blackberry patch, a wild blackberry patch. There you go. That's a lot. Second Saturday of every month. So the next
Second Saturday.
May 13th.
10 a.m.?
Excuse me, sir.
9 a.m.
9 a.m.
We're early birds.
Sir, what was the location?
Is there what?
Sam's Lake Road.
Sam's, like S-A-M-S?
Yep.
It runs right through my property.
Okay, thank you.
Susie, you got something going on. You got a class?
I do. I'm teaching a class here on
At the Howey homestead.
at the Howey homestead on May 13th, the Saturday before Mother's Day.
May 13th.
And it's on growing flowers.
Growing flowers in your garden.
Yeah. So how to grow flowers, and then we'll do a bouquet making, like arranging session at the end, and you can have a bouquet of flowers to bring home. For
Very nice.
a mother.
David Scanlon, you've got practicalplantsflorida.com.
Yes.
You've got an open house coming up.
2 weeks from now, yeah.
2 weeks from now is also the 13th?
Yeah, that's...
I think it's the 13th. I think it's the same day as Susie's.
Yeah, it's the 13th and 14th.
Okay.
And if y'all are going out to the Long and Scott's thing, I'm going to be out there on this Saturday, too. So,
Where's that?
Long and Scott Farms, their 60th anniversary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All you can eat sweet corn, so...
Oh.
Very good. Alan, you ready to teach us about worms?
Yeah.
Just want to remind you, if you need a restroom that is environmentally friendly, we have the little composting toilet there. If you need something a little more modern, I'll show you where the indoor one is. And thank you for coming.
All right. Awesome. Am I good? All right. Awesome. So I'm Alan. I have had some success with worm composting recently. I have had a lot of failures as well, but I can promise you that it is not rocket science. Your worms will tell you a lot about their system, and if they're trying to leave a mass exodus and you have a bunch of worms outside of your system, then you know that you went wrong somewhere. But I have recently been able to take my first bin that was a bit of a trial run from a failure, and from that ended up getting castings and ended up getting more worms, and now I have more worms, and maybe this will continue as a trend. But you can also have that just as easily. Again, I am not a rocket scientist at all, and it's pretty much foolproof for the most part. So I'm going to try to cover the basics of worm composting, why compost with worms, and building the system in a luxury plastic bin hotel from Lowe's or Home Depot at low cost. System care, and then the harvesting process. So the first thing that you're going to need besides worms is some bins. I got 2 of these bad boys. They were $15 each at Lowe's. I actually kind of got a little bit lucky, and they were $11 when I went. You get lids with them. The other lid that I have, I'm probably going to use as something to water seed trays maybe. It holds water perfectly, so you always got a little bit extra from it to do something with, who knows. And building the bin itself is pretty simple. Of course, this is your luxury hotel for them. You want to have air holes up here for them to breathe, and then you want to have drainage holes down at the bottom. And then here is where your worms are hopefully going to stay. I say hopefully because you know, they could just decide at any moment you fed them too much broccoli or too much pineapple or a little scrap of meat fell in there. Maybe they'll leave, maybe they won't touch it. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that part out. And then your other bin is where you collect all of your worm water. You really don't want to leave them sitting in a bunch of water all the time. Again, they'll leave. And so I found this to be pretty much foolproof when it comes to keeping them. I know some people, they'll use bathtubs. I know when I was researching, I saw through David the Good's YouTube that he uses a bathtub. And I was like, oh, I don't want to get a bathtub because say a couple years down the road, I'm just overwhelmed by having a bathtub of worms. What do I do with the bathtub at that point? I don't want to deal with that, so I'm going to stick to my handy dandy worm hotels. And really all you got to do is have some sort of elevation to it, just so you know it drains. Mine is probably going to fall apart at some point, but then that's where the refining comes in. Again, I'm learning the process more and more by just doing it and hoping for the best, and so far it's been working. I did a smaller drill bit along this top part, and then of course use the larger one. You don't really want to drill the lid. I started out trying to drill the lid and that turned out not to be great. I wouldn't recommend doing it because it's just too much light that can end up getting in, and your worms don't like light whatsoever. Speaking of worms, I know that some people use different kinds. I use red wigglers. I've had great success with them. Let's see what else. 5-gallon bucket as well. You want to collect this worm tea somehow. I know some people really like to take the worm castings and put it into a t-shirt and soak it in water for a little bit. I haven't tried that out. I know it's a little bit more anaerobic, especially if you end up containing it in a lid. Again, I don't know too much about that, so I'm not going to try to touch on that too much. But this is actually some worm tea that I got today. It's looking real nice. This is from a newer bin, but it's still looking really well. If you keep it in something like this with a closed lid, it will end up smelling after a couple days. You really want to use it quick, or just keep the lid open so that it stays aerobic. You want to keep that oxygen in, or you'll end up losing a lot of stuff in that process, and that's where you get that like really, really bad smell. It smells horrible. I can tell you that. When it comes to setting up the bin itself, you really want to lasagna it. One thing that I found out early on is that you need a little bit of grit, so I'll add sand from my yard into it. I use mulch mainly because I have way too much mulch lying around, and so might as well use it. They end up breaking it all down. Cardboard, you want to avoid though, like, you know, plastic of course. Anything that's been bleached or has a lot of dyes, they'll end up trying to leave if it's just not fit for them. I use leaves as well. I have those horrible rain trees that will leave leaves all over my yard, but for me, luckily, my worms will end up eating through them. And then after I can't forget either, and this is something I'm going to also be giving to someone. I use this. It's from Lowe's. It's mushroom compost. I don't know the validity of the company. I haven't had any issues with using this worm compost or this mushroom compost. It works on my seed trays, so I'm kind of a little bit trusting of this, but I use this as a bit of an additive to kind of help give them a little bit more room, more soil in there to work out. And if there's anything in there that's gritty, it'll help them end up processing through the food that you give them a little bit more. And then most of all, you need some worms. I would probably say that out of the clump of worms that I grabbed, there might be about 50. But from 50, they will fill up this space to their max capacity. So my first failure was I tried using a 5-gallon bucket for about 1,000 worms because I was like, oh, I just got some worms on sale and I have 1,000 of them. What do I do with them? So I put them in a bucket. I thought I set it up perfectly and I was like, this will work. The next day I had probably about 200 worms that were on the side of it crawling into the soil because it was just not enough space for 1,000 worms. So they will die off or reproduce to kind of match what space you have available to them, especially if the system is how they like it to be. Again, building their system, it's not rocket science. The most money I end up spending on it is the money for the bin, and if I have to end up buying some more mushroom compost, and that's only $5 a bag. But with feeding, that's where it kind of gets a little bit tricky. Don't give them too much of stuff that's acidic. Like too much citrus is not good. I know a lot, like if you do research online, a lot of people will say don't give them anything acidic. Try to stay away from anything within the Basilica family. But small amounts really don't hurt. Like I feed some pineapple, and one of the lists say don't feed them pineapple. A little bit's fine. But if they start trying to stay away from that area or they start trying to migrate out of your system, maybe take the pineapple out and not add that back in. Anything that's cooked, meat, pasta, anything like that, don't really give it to them. Sauces aren't really meant for our worms. Dairy product, of course. Bleached paper. That was another thing that I went wrong. I was like, oh, I have all this junk mail. I guess my worms will probably end up eating it. And no, they did not eat it. They started trying to leave because the bleach in it will start hurting their skin. And so then it's just not a system that they can actually live in. Salty foods or spicy foods, rotten food isn't really good for them. Yard trimmings, I would say try to stay away from, depending. If you know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with your grass, then I would say go ahead and use your grass. But if you don't know if there's any kind of pesticides on them, or you have sprayed some kind of pesticides or herbicides on them, of course you don't want to add that into your compost. Plastic, glass, stuff like that, of course. And again, anything like that they will try to avoid. Garlic as well, garlic and onion. I wouldn't try feeding to them. The paper covering of both should be fine. Again, just kind of watch them. And I feed my worms on a weekly basis to bi-weekly. A lot of our compost actually ends up going into our compost pile instead of the worms, because I don't want to overload them with different things, because then I can't monitor if they're actually eating the stuff or if they're trying to avoid those areas of my system. And a lot of it too is just patience. My first bin probably took about 6 months until I was like, okay, this is broken down enough where I can go ahead and start harvesting from it. And your harvesting process is one that I tried many different things, and I found one that worked at great cost. So at first I had read somewhere that if you just spread it on some kind of surface like a tarp, that you'll be fine. The worms will go to the bottom and then you just kind of rake up the castings up top. Well, I think red wigglers specifically actually only burrow down 2 inches into the soil whenever there's light present hitting on them. And so 2 inches out of a gigantic pile on a tarp, really not that economic of a way of harvesting. So what I did is I took a separate bin, had a light over it, and every 10 minutes I would go through and rake off 2 inches into it and then separated it. And I know that you want to save as many worms as you can from the unfortunate, either fortunate continuation somewhere else in your garden, or possibly suffocating whenever you put the castings in. But you know, the worms will reproduce, they will have more. I had enough to separate into 2 different bins. So don't worry about trying to keep every single worm. It's gonna take you so much longer if you try to do that. But you end up getting awesome stuff for your garden. Right now, the only thing I can attest to using my worm castings tour, because for me it's kind of like having a diamond. I don't want to use it for everything. I use it for my houseplants just as an additive so that I don't have to worry about fertilizing any kind of houseplants, because like, come on, it's a houseplant. Why would I fertilize my monstera? Like, I'm not going to eat it. So I will use a little bit of worm castings just as a treat for me, getting to use something that not only I worked on to set up a system for, but you know, I've gotten an actual yield from it. So to me, I find it really fun to use it for that small stuff. Maybe if I scale up and I have like 5 of these bad boys going, maybe I'll start being able to actually add it to my garden more. But as someone that's starting my systems, this was the perfect thing to start with, because now I know that I have a continuous place for certain of my food scraps to go towards, and I know that at some point it's going to continue to pay itself off. So for me, and going on this journey of trying to be sustainable as a Generation Zer, I find it so cool that I can spend around $35, especially if I already have worms, and from that I have endless amount of good soil that I can add and can continue to build towards something that I want in the future. So for me, it's so rewarding. And then this stuff here, this is super concentrated. I can take this and add it to multiple different things, and I'll mainly have water and just an eensy bit of the worm tea, and it can go on forever. And it's a great gift too to other people that you know that are interested in gardening, and it's kind of like a tool, like, hey, coworker Joe Schmo, like, I have some worm tea. I know you're kind of into building raised beds right now. Here, try this on some of your plants, and then I can teach you how to do it really easily. So to me, that's another valuable resource of it. Hold on, give me a second.
That's not the tea, is it? We're all thinking that, aren't we?
I can't tell you. Anyways. I feel like I've been rambling. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, because really, like, I have just about as much as I can share with you guys, because for me, I'm still learning as I go along. But for anyone that may not have a bin or does, yeah.
Alan, so this setup that you have here,
Yeah.
you have a hole in the bottom yes, so
Yeah.
that's where the tea is coming out of.
Yeah, and so what I do, I work at a t-shirt printing shop, and so I get a bunch of free t-shirts all the time, or I have shirts that I'm like, I'm never wearing this again out in public. And so I will take those and cut them up, and then I will take rocks that you can use for planting succulents, and I will have it as a filter. Kind of like I don't know if anyone has tried building terrariums, but you want to have a drain bottom so that your soil isn't sitting in the water that you give to your terrarium. So I was thinking kind of do the same thing with this bottom bin, but then also have it as a second kind of filtering out, because you will have a lot of microorganisms that are living within the system. Like you will have soldier flies, which any of my other worm composters probably have heard of soldier flies. I haven't had an issue with them in my system, but I know some people say that they're not good for your system. A lot of people say a lot of what's going on might not be good for it, but from what I've seen with my worms, they're not having any kind of issues with any of the microorganisms that are helping them break down all of this matter. So for me, it's kind of a win having these different organisms in it. But yeah, you got to have some kind of drainage. You're not getting the full potential out of your worm system if you aren't harvesting some kind of worm tea, either aerobically or anaerobically.
So,
Out of the numerous attempts you have made, with the bin that you have had the most success with, where did you leave it exactly?
So I have a nice little area where it has a lot of shade, not too much sunlight. And through the winter, they did perfectly fine in that area. And then now in the summer, I'm trying to tweak it to where they have constant shade, because you don't want to have a baked dirt lasagna of however many worms that you end up having.
full deep shade.
Yeah.
Cloth if you need to.
And if it gets a little bit of sunlight, it's not going to hurt them. You know, if it does hurt them, hopefully your system's not too far gone to where whatever worms are left will reproduce. And they'll kind of make sure that they still survive as well. So your worms should be good. Yeah.
Have you had any problems with it drying out?
I try to stay on a pretty consistent schedule of getting my hands in the worm bin and trying to feel how dry it may be. I have my older bin, it has a black lid, and so I think that's been adding to it drying out quicker. But it's just a quick little rinse. You don't want to drown them. Of course, it's all going to drain through, but you want to have that sweet spot between absolutely saturated and a desert, you know, because your worms will end up drying out. They need that water as well, but you don't want to give them an absolute monsoon. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about, I think I squished some of my worms. So how, it's like I took some dirt out of a pot and it was just loaded with worms. So it's like, oh. So I put some of the dirt back in, and then I put some wood chips on, and then I put the rest of the dirt on. So did I squish them?
They should be fine. I couldn't imagine it end up squishing them. And if it did, I'm not a worm expert, but I assume that they'd still be able to separate and still keep living if they were squished in half or something like that. So they should be fine. Yeah.
And you always want a lid on it, right?
Yeah, I try to keep a lid on it just to kind of keep from like fruit flies, because I don't want to be opening up my bin and having a bunch of fruit flies fly in my face after not going to town on a thing of strawberries and giving it to the worms.
You don't
So
want fruit flies.
yeah.
You do not want fruit
Yeah.
flies. Personal experience here. Trust me. It was horrible.
How often do you take the worms and split it so far?
So far I've tried to do it at harvest.
Like how often?
This is something I'm trying to dial in a little bit more. I think I might try to do every 6 months, seeing if it's at the point that it's ready to harvest, and if not, then I may start checking it at bi-weekly to see if, okay, am I wanting, do I like the consistency of my castings, or do I want to let it break down more? And before harvesting, at least a week before, you want to stop feeding them so that whatever is already there, they'll eat through, and then you're not having to sift through a bunch of food scraps when you're harvesting them, depending on how you're able to store your castings.
So,
You said to dilute the tea. So
Yeah.
What ratio?
I think I do about 1 to 10 parts. Really not that much. I mean, this barely has a lid full in it, and man, it just really adds to your daily nutrition.
Alan, is that the secret to your youthfulness?
Yes, actually, that is. Yeah.
Remember, he usually takes one of those Lowe's spray bottles that are this tall, and then he mostly fills it with water and then just adds like a little bit. He's like a tenth of.
Yeah, and I do that for house plants, and I kind of go through that a little bit more slowly. I haven't seen it affect my plants too much. Some people warn against using old worm tea on it having bacteria that could affect plants that you have. So if you have that one plant that you're probably going to cry if it dies, maybe not give them a week's old worm tea. But I like to live life on the edge, so I'm going to keep going that way. Yes, ma'am.
How are you getting the tea? I mean, the worm tea, it's floating. You have the old shirts and you have
Yeah, so
your rock.
at the bottom here, I have a larger hole drilled. And so everything that drains through should kind of go through. And I have it about at this angle of a tilt. And I have this first bin lifted up a little bit by some rocks that I found around in the garden. And so through that, it gives the worms enough air to keep breathing. And then it also keeps it out of water in case I gave it too much water and it takes too long for it to drain out. It won't affect my system of any kind. And then I'll have a 5-gallon bucket right down below to catch everything. And then I try to that day take it out of the bucket, and I'll either directly feed different plants that I have establishing in my garden, or I'll end up storing it to give it to someone else or use it for my variety of houseplants that I have. So I try to make sure that the drainage is good, because honestly the main thing I wanted worms for was the worm tea. I'm a bit of an impatient person, so it's kind of like that instant gratification of, oh, I just pour a little bit of water into this and I get some good stuff to work with.
so
Do you do that the same time as you fed them and you give them some water or berries?
I try to do it whenever I just happen to remember to check them. My worm system is in an area of my garden where I don't have that much foot traffic through. But in doing that, I'm not kind of impatiently checking them every single day, stirring them up or feeding them. It kind of allows me to forget that they're there. They'll keep eating whatever I've given them, and then it's time to check and see if their water's good, or if their soil is nice and moist enough, or if I maybe need to add some more stuff. It's super hands off once you get it established and you feed it. Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to make sure I understand. When you're harvesting the castings, you're trying to leave the worms in the bin as much as you can, or why would you not just pull the worms out and then like put them in a cup and then put them back in?
So The last time I did it, I kind of did a two-part system. I had a cup on hand for any worms that I happened to harvest in the process of doing the 2 inches by 2 inches every 10 minutes. And so what I would do is I would go through, harvest, and then I would actually use one of these lids to set all of my castings on to sort through, so that I can get my fruit, whatever food scraps are left, and whatever worms are still in there. And it's up to you on how meticulous you want to be in that process. But as you continuously go down in the level of the bin, a majority of the worms will end up grouping together at the very bottom of the bin. And so with those castings out down at the bottom, I could either try to push my luck a little bit further and maybe have a little bit more work in sifting through worms, or I can take that and I will separate in half, and one half will be a new bin and the other half will either be that bin or another bin. And so in that harvesting process, that's also that point where you get to decide, do I want to just stick with the one bin or do I separate them out?
So with that in mind,
yeah,
you're shining light to try to get them to go down, right?
Yep.
When it rains, they come up, right?
Yeah.
So if you water it, do they come up then?
That's something that I would have to try. But in that case,
I guess what I'm getting at is, could you water it?
Yeah.
Separate them out, collect your worm teeth, get your castings, put them back in.
I would say I would try that method and see if it works, because again, like any of this stuff, everyone has their own method on what works for them or what they found to be easiest, and that's kind of an awesome thing. Like, my idea might be absolutely ludicrous, but an idea like that might be one where it's like, oh, that's worth trying out.
I know in our bathtub method, we have, for the most part, level, but where the drain is, we have it inclined towards the drain. And when I go to get the castings out, the moisture is collected at that end usually, where the drain is, because of that. I mean, very slight. So I'm taking the castings from the drier part if I've held up on the watering for that period of time. And so I'm not collecting as many worms, I'm just getting the castings, and I really only do that about every 6 months. And then I'm not capturing, but you know, I don't mind worms because I give them to my chickens anyways. But for the most part, that's what, and I've been trial and error like you too, just to see, you know, the container, how that works best. But we keep ours covered, and I keep a 100% cotton towel over the top to keep the moisture in longer. Kind of like and they eventually eat that towel, it just disappears.
Yeah.
But it's an insulator, you know, and maybe I'll have completely unbleached cardboard underneath that even to keep it so I don't have to moisten it as much and break down faster. But again, like you said, lasagna, with your nitrogen, your carbon, you want that in there, you know, so that you're able to break it down easily.
Yeah, and that reminds me, with the nitrogens too, I have a connect with a friend who has a bunch of guinea pigs, but he doesn't do any kind of agricultural stuff, and so I get to have a bunch of guinea pig poop that I get to add to it, because I know some people, they'll add manure, they'll add chicken droppings, probably in really small amounts. You can really put a lot of stuff into this to get whatever you want out of it, and it's all just dependent on either what resources do you already have or what resources are you willing to go after to end up making it work. Because like, I don't have any animals on my property besides a cat and a dog, and so I don't want to use that for my worm compost. So I, you know, figure out what ends up working for you.
You said you did a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
Did you ever try the 3-bin method?
I never got that far, because after figuring out, okay, this is how I want to do it, I didn't really want to get a third bin, but is that where you kind of have your two worm bins and then the drain at the bottom?
Yeah, the idea behind it, which is a lot of people, manufacturers who make custom homemade worm bins, is that the bottom one will catch the worm teeth. The second one will be the primary home where you start, and once that bin is mostly filled, you put a second bin on top of it. And as they consume the foodstuffs in the first bin, they will slowly migrate up through the holes in the bottom into the next bin. And once all the stuff on the bottom is completely consumed and composted, they will evacuate it, and you can just flip the second bin off and have completely worm-free worm castings right there.
I'm gonna have to.
I've been trying to test that myself, but my first set completely died when it got infected by fruit flies.
Oh.
And I just started my second attempt with actual 5-gallon buckets 2 days ago.
Okay.
So I can't be certain as to how well that will work or not.
Man. Yeah, like, you know, there's multiple different options. I might have to try that out, because I kind of got into a thing where I started going to different places and seeing, oh, what could I turn into a terrarium and what could I turn into a composting system. And I found this really cool recycling bin set from IKEA. It was like dirt cheap too, but every single one slid perfectly onto another. And so it's like, oh, worm composting. Obviously, you could have an easy setup system that looks really nice. Or you could just go bare bones as possible. You know, it's really up to you. Yeah.
Say with those those towers, you gotta be careful that black soldier fly larvae don't get in there, because they don't fit through the holes, so they just plug them all up. I had to throw mine out because I just kept having problems with that.
I would also recommend, if you know how to, try to make that model yourself with just 5-gallon buckets, because most producers will charge ridiculous amounts of money for homemade ones, like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah, I see a lot of worm systems that people are trying to market for inside of your home, in the kitchen, something ridiculous like that at a ridiculous price tag. At max, this was like $30, and I already had the worms. So, you know, you really can shave as much money as possible. If you have a bunch of totes already that are just sitting in storage and have a bunch of junk in it, maybe, you know, use one of those, or just go and buy another. It's really a fun thing to try out. Any other questions?
Actually, we'll get back around to the 3-bin system. The only flaw that I can think of so far, I would like your recommendation for it. The thing is, once the third bin is placed, the third bucket is placed on top, you have that ring around the side where the worms can crawl. What would you recommend as a plug so that the oxygen could still get in, but they can't get out?
Ooh.
You said cotton towels, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't keep them from getting out. That just keeps water in. Like, we have ours covered, but they can always get out. But I think, in my mentality, make the environment favorable, feed them, and they won't go out.
Yeah, I would say. Yeah, I would say that, and then also space. Like, start out with not that many worms, because they'll fit to whatever that space is, and they really won't end up wanting to leave, because you've set their food source in there. And so as long as there's that food and that safe system for them to be in, they're gonna want to stay in that. I would say, you know, continuous trial and error. You lose some worms, it's all good. They'll come back.
Hey Alan, where would you suggest we get worms for our bin?
So there's a lot of different resources online. I wouldn't recommend going and finding an earthworm in your garden. Earthworms will not eat the decomposing food. They eat dirt. You really want to go after the red wigglers. I don't know the name of other composting worms that a lot of people use. I know that there's a local company somewhere around here. That's where I got mine from. I have heard that Amazon you can actually get red wigglers from. I think it's like, then there's Jim's worm tea or something like that. That's another one that you can get some worms from.
Palmer's Church Street Station or Church Street down in Orlando. That's where I got mine.
Okay.
Or Ace Hardware.
Yeah, Ace Hardware. I think.
The bait shop.
Yeah, are night crawlers composting worms too, or no? No. Okay.
Wigglers on the main section at Walmart.
They have wrigglers and they have night crawlers.
Okay, yeah. So you can go to a bait shop too. Get your worms there if you want to go down to the local bait shop.
And Alan, there's two ways of getting the tea. There's one with the hole in the bottom.
Yes.
The other is to take some of the castings, put them in a sock, put them in water, correct?
Yeah, and so depending on how you do it, if you end up closing that off, that's where your difference between anaerobic and aerobic. So it's just the presence of oxygen or not. I try to stick towards having my oxygen in because I don't. Doing anaerobic, I haven't gone into that too much, and so just for me personally, I try to stick within what I know right now before I start trying to dive into how long do I let my worm castings marinate, you know. So I try to stick to that, but I know that some people do that, and I know you do that.
Yeah, well, it does stink. The anaerobic smell.
Yeah. Do you see any like a lot of benefits on the plants that you do use it on?
I haven't had it used it long enough, so I don't know.
Okay.
I do know that when it's working, the actual soil does not smell.
Yeah.
My soil smelled, and then I put the worms in there, and real quickly, within a week, it didn't, that odor.
Yeah, your worm system, if it smells, there might be something wrong, but for the most part, it really shouldn't smell that much. And if you want to deal with the smell a little bit, and this kind of goes into biochar, Paul, you can use biochar in your worm composting bin to activate it. It takes a little bit longer. But then,
if you do use biochar in the worm system, make sure you crush it up really small so that the worms can actually consume it.
Yeah, and that's another grit that you can use instead of sand if you're worried about possibly getting nematodes introduced into your worm system. Just use some biochar. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any like predators that we have to worry about, like knocking the bins over or anything?
It depends on how steady that you set it. I'm gonna be honest, these bins weigh a lot, especially if you try to get as much castings from it as possible. So for me, I haven't been too worried about predators knocking over my bins or trying to get into them. I've been worried about what I have my bins setting on just falling apart from the weight of now 2 bins sitting on it. So predators, I mean, I can't see a lot of stuff wanting to get in, especially if you're keeping meat and dairy and rotting foods out. So not too sure in terms of things that would be able to knock it over.
Okay. Not a question, but you're talking about grit and talking about multi-use grits. I use azomite as the grit in my worm bins. So you're adding minerals, so when you get to your end product, it's got a little bit more into it. And they were talking about soldier flies. They're real seasonal here.
Yeah.
So usually only get them in the summer. My bins are a little more open.
Yeah.
So I tend to get them more. I compost big enough where it's not an issue, but literally they're only in the top. They don't burrow at all.
Yeah.
So if you have chickens, you just scoop them off. It becomes kind of probably 4 or 5 months out of the year, kind of a part of the system, and it doesn't affect it too much.
Oh.
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to remember that come summertime and whenever I have chickens.
But I don't have like a ventilation holes. It's an IBC tote with just a flat piece of an old political sign actually on top of it, and it's so it's a little more open to the elements.
I still, even with the vents, do still get some black soldier flies and some other flies, but it's not really too much. At least from what I've seen. And I'm thinking with My first bin that I used, I did a little bit of a different bin design, and so it doesn't have the slip. So I'm wondering if now that there's the slip, maybe not as many bugs will end up getting into the system. So, you know, still trying to figure out in terms of this one, but this is kind of like my little 2.0 luxury hotel. We went from Holiday Inn to Hilton, yeah, Hilton. Any other? Yeah.
You brought it up earlier, and thank you for reminding me, because that's actually something I was wondering about. This also involves what you said, Paul. You said to add biochar to the bin to help deal with smell, but that's the thing. I know from your class that there are two kinds of biochar, the activated kind and the sterile kind. Is the sterile kind hazardous to worms?
Oh, that's an interesting.
Because I know that the activated actually has worm castings in it.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to make sure it's activated. Make sure it's activated and activated for a while. The reason for that is when biochar is raw, it's going to have a very high pH. It's going to be very alkaline. And so if you get that in contact with the worms, then they're going to want to leave.
Yeah.
So make sure you get a good inoculation going to bring that, you know, to neutralize that.
Could you just soak it in the leach?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that.
And then add it back?
Yeah, yeah, you could probably take some castings, mix it in the biochar, wait for 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and then mix it back.
Yeah, and then
I wouldn't use the raw biochar.
yeah, and the benefit too is that whatever biochar that ends up being mixed in also has the microorganisms from the castings, from everything going on within the system. This is, at least for me, this is how I'm thinking that it'll end up benefiting the system overall, and then I have better biochar. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out again. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
How much of that bag of dirt would you put into that size bin that you got?
It depends on how much mulch I'm willing to go and grab. My first bin I did mainly mulch and a little bit of this, and then my second one I tried to do a 50-50 of like how much mulch to that I put in, and then try to use cardboard as spacers, and trying to my second bin I tried to do it as cheap as possible just to see how much easier that I can try to make it on myself. Yeah, I would say about half of that, and then you have something that you can use on seed trays that will do just fine.
So after you've layered it all at the beginning, how deep is it when you start?
I try to get it to about here, and it'll start compacting down as time goes on. Like my one of my bins that I set up after harvesting, I thought that I filled it up pretty decently, and then everything's just kind of going down, and so I might end up introducing more material to the system just to kind of get more castings as I go. But at first it'll seem like everything's pretty full. Yes, ma'am.
So I just kind of have a curiosity question.
Yeah.
We used to have a convenience store and sold bait.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a refrigerator, we kept the bait in. We had a really bad storm one time. I came into the store and there was worms everywhere. They got out of the refrigerator, even with the seals. So with the storm we recently had, did you have a problem with your worms trying to leave?
No.
Because we thought the storm is what disturbed them. And
yeah. So far, I haven't seen any worms trying to exit from their new systems that I have, but I try to be careful on exactly what I feed them and how much. And the rain, my main issue is figuring out how can I use whatever rain collects on this lid itself, because it's pretty deep. It can collect a lot of water. So I've been trying to figure out what exactly I can use with that rainwater that's collecting. But no, none of the storms have affected it. Even when we had our freezes, my worms were perfectly fine. I added some jugs of hot water just in case, because I didn't know if they'd be fine or not. And the temperature inside the bin stayed nice and warm throughout the winter time too, so didn't have to worry about bringing in the bins or anything like that. I would say if you have your system at the right space on your property and you have it properly covered in some kind of way, that the storm should affect them too much.
What about putting leashes on each one of them and making sure they stay?
You know, I've been trying that, but they really don't take to obedience training very well, and they're very food driven. I will warn you on that one. Yeah, yes ma'am.
So when you're gonna get ready to collect your tea,
Yeah.
you put the amount of water depending on how much tea you want to get out?
I kind of eyeball it. For me, it's I water until I feel like it's fine, and if it's been more on the dry side, I'll add more water, and if it's not that, if it's super moist, I'll either not add water or just add just a tiny bit so I don't have to worry about it.
I have a worm bin.
Yeah.
And I don't see, well, I did not tilt it or anything. So it's moist, so I never put water, but I'm not collecting tea. So, and there's plenty, I see there's plenty of worms.
Yeah.
And they eat what I put there. And maybe I'm not doing it right, but what I do is that I try to get the less amount of worms and just get a little bit and put it in. Like if I'm gonna plant something, I'll mix it with my soil.
Okay. So you're kind of harvesting as you go along?
Yes, but I would like to get some tea. Now I know I need to tilt.
Yeah, and you need to have some way for it to drain out.
Okay, and so when I do that, and if it's still moist, how much water would I need to put to get the tea?
My philosophy with a lot of plants is if it's moist, should be good. And just wait until it starts drying out before you add any more.
Okay, so to get the tea, I would just kind of like dry it out and then put water.
Oh, okay. I understand now. So, for the tea, I would say, yeah, water per how much you want to get. This was majority of the bucket that I had, and then I had some extra. I really just take my water hose and just kind of spray it through until I start seeing a little bit of water drip out from the bottom bin, and then that's the point where I stop watering, and then I just let the system do its thing until maybe a week or two later that I'll repeat the same process. Yeah.
So will you harvest that tea like a week later, or once it all fills up your...
Once it all fills up, or I'm tired of waiting for all the little drops to end, I'll just take it and I'll either bottle it like this to give to someone at work, or I'll pour it onto different plants that I have. No.
I have found that with my tea, when I water a plant, there's eggs inside the tea, and new worms will begin growing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I've thought about trying to do like just start spreading around some of the red wigglers in my garden bed and doing like a chop and drop system. I don't know if that would actually work unless it was at night, but you know, I've played around with the idea of just having worms in different places. Be cool to do have a potted plant and also it being a worm composting system, maybe. Who knows? The possibilities are endless. Yes, sir.
If you're going to start this system, how many worms will you put in?
I would say with a system like this, it would probably be able to. Well, I know for certain it would be able to sustain, I would say, around 900 to 1,000. Again, I did have a mass exodus, so the amount of worms that were still left after the exodus is a bit unknown, but I think roughly I had probably around 1,000 worms in a bin like this. Starting out next, I probably had about 200 worms. So I don't know how that's gonna work with the system, if it'll be better, or if they're gonna just start filling this bad boy up. But I would say any amount of worms work. Again, my philosophy is always work with what you got. If you only have 50 worms, hey, 50 worms is better than no worms. So, yeah.
Another good place to buy worms is Uncle Jim's Worm Farm.
Yeah, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, Uncle Jim's Worm Farm has a lot of good information too in regards to worm bins. Like,
Specialize in composting worms.
yeah, yeah, good resource to check out.
I just keep coming back to your question. Sorry, man.
No, it's all right.
You said your cardboard spacers. Do you soak the cardboard beforehand? Just because I know some cardboard has chemicals in it. But is that hazardous for your worms, or does that really make a difference?
I'm gonna be honest. I never thought about any of my cardboard having any chemicals on it, but I haven't seen any adverse effects to my worms. So it's kind of like maybe not. I really am not sure, but I have, from whatever cardboard I've had lying around that I've used, and I haven't had too many issues in terms of the worms reacting to it. And I try to have that more at a lower level, and while I'm setting up my bin, I am going through and moistening my different layers. Since I'm working with mulch, I need to make sure that mulch actually gets moist, or it won't stay moist at all. So at least for me, I would say I do water and at least soak the cardboard first, but I don't know about in terms of the chemicals and their effects.
Thank you.
Yep.
How much castings do you put on your trees, and how do you put it on your trees?
I haven't gotten that much worm castings yet, so as much as I want to put some on my trees, I've been a little bit frugal with my castings, so I am not I'm not certified to answer that question, unfortunately. But there may be someone else here that actually has a big enough worm system to where they can ball out like that. Anyone?
I just used whatever.
Okay.
A handful.
Okay.
A handful, whatever you got.
Yeah.
From the expert.
Yeah.
I use about the same amount as I would use as an organic granular, which is basically manure and things too. So, it depends on your tree size or your application. If you're doing raised beds or pots or annuals or whatever, tiny bit for, just use it in scale for that. But I only do my castings once or twice a year. So at that point, I'm putting it all in one thing. I'm starting over every time. I'll take a little bit, like a 3-gallon bucket of worms, and start the next batch.
I'm gonna remember that.
I don't know if it's the right way. I'm like you. I'm learning too.
Yeah. Every step's a learning process.
But it is good stuff, and it does not smell.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions or anything?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Your cardboard, do you have to make sure that it doesn't have a plastic coating or anything? It has to be just a...
Yeah, I would say so. Like if it has kind of a waxy film to it, maybe not use it. Or if it has some kind of ink on it, probably not use it. I like Amazon boxes, the plain ones that just have a little bit of black ink on it. For me, if I just flip it over, then I don't see the ink, then it's not a problem. So that's I would say try out that philosophy. Anyone else? I feel like I've been rambling a little bit. Thank you.
Where's your worm bin? So if anyone wants to see.
No judgment. Y'all, it is not a professional outfit, but it is down there. We'll look at it before dark if y'all want to. And I do have a bunch of leachate if y'all want to, if you have containers. I might have some containers if you want to take some home. Just
And then,
over here, if anybody
real quick, anyone who does not have a worm bin, please raise their hands. Okay. I'm gonna spin around, and whoever I point at will get the spin and the mushroom compost and the worms. Right?
Let's spin the bottle.
Oh yeah. You're the closest to it, so winner, winner, chicken dinner.